Welcome to the Metamorphosis Podcast, hosted by Nora Brucker in Germany and myself, Erin Howe, in the United States. In this podcast, we talk to people about transformation and the moments and events that change us. We hope you enjoy. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Metamorphosis Podcast. Today, I'm talking with Lisa Latimer. Lisa is a self-awareness facilitator and advocate. She's the author of a book that we'll get to later in the interview, no spoilers, and the creator and host of the Personal Growth Lifestyle Podcast. A little background on Lisa. After healing from her own abusive relationships and watching her mother struggle to find her greatness, Lisa knows what it takes to overcome insecurities, low self-esteem, and a crippling fear of failure. She awakened the power we all have within through self-awareness and teaches other women how to create fulfillment in all aspects of life using what she calls a foolproof compass. And now, on to our chat.
I am a self-awareness facilitator. A little bit different from a coach because I get a lot of confused looks when I say I'm a self-awareness facilitator. I got to this point because for over a decade, I allowed myself to be a victim of really toxic relationships and narcissist abuse. So from 16 to about 27, I was in a narcissist abuse relationship with my high school boyfriend and moved on from that relationship to one that was actually more dangerous. And almost took my life, actually. A very dramatic incident in that second relationship. That was also a narcissist abuse relationship. Once I was able to create enough space between myself and that final toxic relationship, I was able to retreat back home with my family, do a lot of reflecting and a lot of self-healing. And I realized that the majority of not only my problems, but problems that we tend to have in general that boil down to a lack of self-awareness. And so that's when I decided, instead of focusing on just being a life coach, let's focus on self-awareness, because that's really, once we have steady roots in our self-awareness, it is so hard for us to get shaken off of our path by anything. It took so many years after the fact, because I had never even heard of narcissist abuse relationships. I've heard of abusive relationships. But only about 2 or 3 years ago did I hear the term narcissist abuse, and everything that it described, I was like, wow, that's exactly what was happening to me. And so when you're someone who's, and there are so many of us out there that are a victim of toxic relationships and narcissist abuse, and it doesn't just have to be romantic relationships. It could be family. It could be work environments where you're dealing with those types of personalities, either as a boss or, a coworker. And the crazy thing is that a narcissist abuser will usually use something called gaslighting. So they'll feed you stories about yourself that are not true to manipulate you and to really bring down your self-esteem. And when you don't have that self-awareness established ahead of time, it becomes really easy to believe this kind of caricature of yourself that they're purposely feeding you. And that's exactly what happened to me for over 11 years of my life. And, it's so much easier not to allow it to happen and have that self-awareness in place beforehand. But, once you get thrown off of that path, it's so much more difficult to start cutting through all the BS that you've been fed and get back to yourself and start building that self-awareness from scratch.
Right. And for some reason, it's much easier to latch on to the negatives that people will throw at you instead of the positives, right?
Always. Always. Actually, when I was researching for my book, 77% of our thoughts are actually negative. So our self-talk is so important because our self-talk feeds our thoughts. And our self-talk also tends to echo the people that are around us. So if you have people that want to purposely manipulate you, you're going to believe the stories and the insults that they kind of throw at you. And those insults are going to become part of your own self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the reasons why, particularly for people who are in these types of relationships or at risk for being in these types of relationships, having that self-awareness is so important.
So what do you think about the idea that people will kind of fall into patterns with it and almost invite those negative people in? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So I'm weird with my beliefs. I'm a person of faith. I also believe in energy and law of attraction and manifesting. And it all kind of, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you say something enough to yourself, or, you have something said to you often enough, you start to believe it. It becomes part of your psyche. It starts to affect the energy that you put out there. And once you start putting out the wrong energy, you start to attract the wrong things. Mm-hmm. And this becomes something, like I said, where once you already get to that point in that cycle where you go deeper and deeper in, it's so much harder to come back out of that territory and kind of hit that reset button, if you will. Mm-hmm. But it's so important to roll up your sleeves and get in there and do the work, because otherwise you will, like you said, it's so easy to just continue rolling along with a pattern than it is to rewind, bring it all the way back, mm-hmm. and start from scratch and get your mindset right so that you can rewrite that story, rewrite that internal, narrative that you have, mm-hmm. and start putting out a different energy and getting different results.
Do you think that people have an easier time bringing themselves to self-awareness if they, it sounds ridiculous, but if they start early, or is it ever too late to achieve?
It's never too late. It, of course, like I said, it becomes a little bit more difficult the further you go into, into your actions and into the beliefs and the patterns that you have, but it's really never too late. And actually, that's a great question, because with my children, I am so aware of the importance of self-awareness that I'm consciously trying to find that balance between, being overbearing, giving them enough room to develop their own self-awareness and their own identity. And even down to the words that I choose when I speak to them. I try to make sure that I'm giving them the right message that's going to put them in that growth mindset, that's going to allow them to develop their self-awareness so that they become mindful of it. So when we grow in our own self-awareness, it becomes this gift that kind of keeps on giving, and we can pass it down to our children or anyone else around us.
So what does that look like for a kid? I have kids too, so I'm curious, if I do the right things. So what are some of the things to avoid saying, or to invite them to explore their self-awareness more?
Right. So that's an awesome question. What I do, it's really simple with children. So we start out our mornings with affirmations. And I'll be the first one to say that two things that are huge: affirmations and journaling. The affirmations feed our self-talk, and reflective journaling allows us to identify patterns, because if we don't realize a pattern exists, we can't break it. But so I, for the longest time, was like, oh, that sounds so cheesy, or it sounds like just another thing to have to throw on my to-do list. But going through affirmations in the morning with your children is such a great start to the day. And you can tailor it to anything that your children like. So part of our affirmation is, I'm strong and brave like Hulk, because my son is huge into the Hulk.
Yeah.
So we go down this affirmation, and then at the end of it, it's, and I can do anything, and I'm going to have a great day. And so it puts them in that mindset. It puts the energy out there. And I explain to them as we say it, this is to make you feel good inside. And when you feel good inside, it comes out, it's like a light, and you're just training that light to shine as bright as possible. So they love it. And, it also looks like kind of letting them get messy and dirty and do the things that they enjoy doing. So for my daughter, we have this kind of spot in our backyard where the grass hasn't grown into well. And she loves taking a bucket and shovel and just sitting there and digging in the dirt. And, and to the point that it's like, oh my gosh, that most parents would probably freak out. And you just, you're like, okay, she's doing her thing. Let me just take a deep breath. That's what the washing machine and bathtub are for. You have to kind of take your own feelings about certain situations and learn to just take a deep breath and allow your children their space.
Yeah, that's key for everyone's sanity. I think that's a big step.
We're all home with our kids.
Right? For like 5 months now, right?
Yeah.
So when you started this, how did you start in with like your daily affirmations or journaling? Where was your start?
Yeah, my start was with, first it was just reflection. So I wasn't even journaling initially, but there was so much to unwrap that I just kind of started saying, you know what, I have to get this down because I can't possibly remember all of this and put all of this together. So I started the reflective journaling, and initially I wasn't that comfortable looking back. So when I go into my past, I started, okay, what happened a week ago? And then I got comfortable going back a few months. And then I got really comfortable delving into things that happened to me, decades ago that left an impression, and writing down the incident, reflecting on how it made me feel, reflecting on, what are the false truths and the self-limiting beliefs that I, in present day, have weighing me down that stem from all the way back then. Because a lot of time when we're reacting out of fear, which for some people it may look like not taking action at all. For some of us, it looks like taking tiny little steps because we're kind of scared to just let that light shine fully. It that doesn't come out of nowhere. It's attached to something from the past. That's why I say you have to whip out a journal. It could just be a pen and paper, and think about things that happened in your past. Reflect on them. Reflect on the feelings. Reflect on your present day behaviors that might be connected to that, and how they kind of relate to each other. And if you do this for a couple of weeks, I guarantee you'll come up with amazing patterns that have been right under your nose the whole time that you didn't even know exist. So having a method and even a little ritual set up around doing it, a certain day of the week, maybe you have a certain surroundings that you go to, or set up a little space where you live where you can just go be quiet, relax, and just let those thoughts go. I call it organized chaos. It's kind of like in the 80s, and I know I'm dating myself, but the pinball machines in the 80s where you pull the lever back and you just let the ball go and it kind of pings and pongs and lights up all these different things.
Yep.
That's kind of what you do when you're doing this kind of organized chaos and this reflecting. You see what lights up, you see how the things that light up relate to each other, and you put that all together, you write it down, and then you see how it relates to certain behaviors or issues that you're going through right now. And that's how you start to have these aha moments.
Right.
And once you get to the point of having aha moments, the journaling becomes almost addictive because it's all about progress.
Can you pinpoint a moment when you kind of had that light bulb of becoming self-aware and realizing that it was a big deal?
Absolutely. So the first moment that I realized that I was self-aware, and with self-awareness comes all these other awesome benefits, like finally tapping into and trusting your intuition. So this happened when I was 9.5 years into the 11-year relationship with my high school boyfriend. And for the longest time, all I wanted was to have this person that I loved and adored to think that I was worthy of, becoming his wife and propose to me. So I went snooping, which was just a habit of just the wild insecurities that I had and lack of self-awareness that I had, because I would always find little hints of him, being up to no good. So this time, what I found was more disturbing than any other time in the past. I actually found a receipt for an engagement ring that was on layaway. And yes, it was for me, because I had gotten questions like, well, if he was such a cheater, how do you know it was for you? No, it was confirmed that it was for me. I had confirmation that I was finally getting what I wanted. My stomach dropped into my sneakers and was like, no. Like my gut was turning and twisting so hard, telling me, this is not for you. This situation is never going to get better. And then I started to react on my gut. And it took a little time, but I did eventually break those kind of trauma bonds that I had with him, and that kind of just habit. He was almost like a habit. I took another year and a half to break that habit, but I knew from that point on that I couldn't do that, and that I had to continue to have that awareness and trust my gut and listen to my feelings and clearly define what fulfillment looked and felt like for me. My gut knew that what I was living with him and that those patterns, that wasn't what fulfillment was for me. I don't think that that's what fulfillment is for anyone. But again, we get into these patterns that we feel stuck in, and we don't realize our own power to be able to get out of them.
Sure. Huh. So that was your aha.
That was my first aha, yeah.
And thank goodness for it, right? Because otherwise, who knows?
Complete life changer.
Wow. So from there, you made yourself an expert in it. How does one become an expert in self-awareness?
That's something that life just kind of teaches you. And again, you learn that lesson through not just going through it yourself and getting yourself back to that reset point, but you really have to sit there and have the courage to pick all of these different things apart about yourself. Because so often we hear these gurus telling us, you don't need your past, your past doesn't define you, which it doesn't define you, but you absolutely need your past. Because if you want to start looking at patterns that need to be broken and replaced, where else are you going to look
right.
to discover, where those patterns came from? You have to look behind. You can't just, take a match and set your past ablaze. You need it. And when you become self-aware, you understand that you can safely go into your past and find all of these valuable nuggets that are going to make your future that much better. So it's just something that I had been in the trenches of for over 4 years before I got to the point where I felt like I could start talking about it and start listening into other people and see what they were dealing with. And lo and behold, time after time, I saw that everything always came back to lack of self-awareness, not understanding enough about ourselves, not understanding what it takes for us to be happy. And that's why so often we leave our happiness and fulfillment to other people, because we don't even know where to begin. And we're just kind of hoping and expecting that someone else, whether it's a significant other or a friend, kind of has those answers for us. And if you think about it, it's an unfair burden to place on anyone, and it's our responsibility. And that's when life gets good, when we understand that it's our responsibility and that we have the power and we go for it.
Yeah, that's great. I always try to remind myself, to not forget the past, and not hate it either, because it, good or bad, it's what makes you who you are today.
Absolutely.
Right? You absolutely need it, because otherwise you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be you.
Absolutely. And you're allowed to feel however you feel about your past and about, specific incidences when you start looking at them. But, you don't have to be afraid about being defined by your past. If you think about it, if you were to come across, say, an awesome, cool archaeological site where there were all these artifacts being unearthed, right? Would you run from it? Or would you be like, oh my God, what can I find here that's of value? What can I find here that's cool? You have to kind of do that with your own past. You have to dig for those things of value. And just like what you would find on an archaeological dig doesn't apply necessarily today. We're not living that way today, right? Your past is not how you're necessarily meant to live in your present or your future. So we have to find a way to detach our fear from the past. It doesn't define us, but there are such valuable pieces of information that can help us transform ourselves and get to who and where we want to be in our future.
I love that analogy of the archaeological dig. That's awesome. So tell us about how you go about helping others with their own self-awareness. I know you've written a book and you do some other things. What can you tell us about some of that?
Sure. So it's funny because in my book, I kind of go through the process. The only difference is with my clients is I walk them through it, kind of hand in hand. So it always starts with the reflective journaling, which we've gotten into a little bit already. You always want to have some insight from your past at your disposal. And then we get into, and I'm sure that this is nothing new. So we hear so many people talk about the vision board, right? So instead of a vision board, what I write about in my book and what I have clients create is called a future self avatar. So a quick background on what an avatar is. So a lot of marketers and entrepreneurs, they'll use an avatar, which is they take their ideal client and they define this person to the point that it could be like a real live living person, right? Mm-hmm. They know all of that person's desires, fears, values, goals. And they don't just talk about what things look like, but they talk about the way things feel. And so often with vision boards, we get lost in the kind of aesthetic of the pictures that we're putting together on our vision board. Mm-hmm. And this is where we get stuck with our self-awareness, is that a lot of times it's hard to detach or differentiate between where our ego is pulling us versus where our soul and spirit are pulling us. So when you do a future self avatar, you go not just into how things look, but how things feel in different aspects of your life. So it's very organized by aspect of your life or bucket for the purposes of my book. I break down different aspects of life, like your personal finances, your career, your parenting, your romantic relationships, into buckets. Mm-hmm. And when we get instead of focusing on individual buckets, I have my clients focus on the one larger bucket, their self-awareness, that when you get that bucket filled to a certain level, it neatly spills over into those other buckets, and often simultaneously. So I've had, clients, and I don't usually get people that come to me for weight loss. That's not usually a main goal. But when we start uncovering certain patterns, they'll realize that, oh my gosh, for example, when I start feeling anxiety or a little depressed, not only do I tend to run up my credit card, and spend outrageous amounts of money on crap I don't need, but I also have a tendency of binge eating around that time too. That's another way that it starts to manifest itself. So when we become self-aware, see right there, you have now a helpful insight in your financial bucket and your health, your fitness bucket, whatever it is. And because oftentimes we're chasing these buckets individually. And what happens? You never experience fulfillment in more than one or two of them simultaneously. And the other ones are spilling out all over the place. Mm-hmm. So when we focus on self-awareness, which is what I do with my clients, they start to see the results in all of those other aspects of their lives effortlessly without having to jump from one thing to the other. They're just laser focused on the one thing. And again, that's through the reflective journaling, becoming conscious of their self-talk, creating the future self-avatar, which, breaks down every bucket of their life, what they want it to look like, what they want it to feel like. Because my first vision board, I was cutting out, and this was before Pinterest. So I was actually cutting things out of magazines. So like vision boards tend to actually take people down the ego-driven path rather than the soul and spirit-driven path. So that's why when I work with clients, I work very closely with them to make sure that they're able to distinguish between their ego, what their ego wants, and what they want, and what truly speaks to their heart and soul.
Right.
It's not so much the look of things, but it's the feel of things that really gets us anchored to those goals.
And I have a prediction to make.
Okay.
But I have a feeling that what you're going to tell us is when your motivation is external, it's going to not go as well as if your motivations are internal.
Well, that's huge. And that's why I said, with the vision boards, I do a future self avatar, because the avatar just gets deeper. It gets into a lot of the whys, the feels of things, and You're absolutely right, Erin. When you're just that's ego. Like when you're
Right.
just looking at something, and not only that, like so I had these couture pictures cut out, and I had these sport cars cut out and pasted to my vision board. But I don't even want to drive a sports car. I'm so happy in my mommy mobile. It brings me so much joy and convenience.
It's really hard to separate the two.
It is. Well, and that's where you have to really and get brutally honest with yourself. So many people talk about self-care, and like, let me tell you something. Self-care is not all bubble baths and spas and manis and pedis. One of the most important but least glamorous parts of self-care is what you're saying. Like digging into and just being brutally honest with yourself. Even if it's something that you feel like would make, I don't know, whoever's closest to you, your parents, your significant other, your best friend cringe, even if it makes you cringe, pull it out. And that's why with the journal, you pull it out, you put it down on the paper, and it's in front of you, and you just deal with it. So COVID has definitely been a blessing for self-awareness. And I have been encouraging everyone to really get in there, take this time. Pay attention to who you truly miss and who you do not miss. Because going forward, there is eventually going to be a closer to back to normal than we're at now. And you're going to want to make sure that you're protecting your vibes and protecting your energy. I released my book during lockdown, and I had a couple of things in my book, a couple of realizations about where I became comfortable with the pattern of carrying other people's emotional baggage. And it came from my mother, and it was nothing that she did intentionally. But in mentioning that in my book, I ruffled a few feathers in my family. And so it actually caused a bit of a rift. So during COVID, I haven't had much contact between myself and certain people in my family, and people that I was in touch with every single day. I've come to realize that I would be in touch with them, and all I would be listening to is them complain. Or when they called me, it wasn't even, oh, hey, how are you? They would just jump right into their needs, their wants. Can you believe what so-and-so is doing now? And I just realized that energy, I'm not missing that energy.
Yeah,
and
it's draining.
Yeah, it's draining. So this COVID and the social distancing is really, if you're open to it, it's really an eye-opener for the energy that you need to continue once things get back to normal, keeping those energies at bay or cutting those energies off completely. And again, you as with everything, you use self-awareness in dealing with it. So if you have to completely cut off someone's energy, you do it, and you do it in a way that's comfortable for you. If you can just deal with keeping someone at like arm's reach, then you can do that as well. That's an option too. But this is a time for, I feel like, many awakenings. And if ever there's a time to start being brutally honest with yourself, this is the perfect time.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's happening even without necessarily the intentional reflection. Like it's lots of quiet hours to sit and have all of the self-reflection.
Absolutely. And that's something, again, if you're going to get into the habit of journaling and reflecting, this is a great time because you're not used to having that downtime. You're so busy and into work. And then we're all kind of thrust into this situation where we have no other choice. So hopefully we'll learn to kind of tolerate that downtime a little bit better and start, putting it into our schedules once things pick back up. And saying and realizing that it belongs, it has a place in our lives just as much as our jobs, our families, and everything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. So what else should we know about your book aside from the buckets? Can you please tell us the name of it?
Shall I filter the name or shall I?
Have at it. It's your book. You own it.
Okay, awesome. So the name of the book is Who the Fuck Are You? Get self-aware to stop getting your ass kicked and live a kick-ass life. And, it's not about, I say in the book, it's not like looking at one of these Instagram pages that are glamorous, like a Kardashian Instagram page. It's not about glamorous. It's about what feels good. It's about what resonates with you. And doing the work to become self-aware is not glamorous, but it's one of the most worthy endeavors that any of us could take on, because your life, your happiness, your fulfillment, and the fulfillment and happiness of those around you literally depends on it. So in the book, we get into that self-awareness bucket concept that I described to you earlier, where we're zeroing in on self-awareness, filling that bucket, so that once it gets to a certain level, it starts to neatly spill over into all of the other buckets. And it just makes that grind that life tends to have for so many of us feel a lot more smooth and a lot easier. And that's really what you want. The goal isn't to be a Kardashian. The goal is to just be able to wake up without having an alarm screaming in your ear, without going to your job that you hate because you have the threat of living in the street if you don't. The goal is to wake up to a life that you want to wake up to. Personal growth and development is messy. When people talk about like personal growth, they kind of, and having like awakenings and breakthroughs, they get this image in their head, I think. And like you said, it could be because of the Instagram pages out there. They expect unicorns and rainbows and butterflies. And what it really is like, you end up looking like you kind of have been run through hell, but you feel amazing. The process feels like you've been run through hell, but the reward afterwards is just, it's a freedom, it's a clarity, and it's a faith and certainty that you have in yourself and in your life, that once you have it, you own it, and nobody can take it away from you. You are not a victim of fate. You are not here to rely on luck. You are here to make your own way and to allow your self-awareness to guide you so that you can fearlessly live whatever life that you want to live.
I like that. And can you tell people where to find you
Sure.
on all of the channels?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me. My website is LisaLatimer.com, LisaLatimer.com. And from there, you can listen to my podcast that I've just started called Personal Growth Lifestyle. You can also from there click the link and it'll take you to Amazon for the book, which is priced at 99 cents because I just want to get the word out there. I feel like there's genuinely such great stuff in that book. It's not fluff. It's the real, meat and potatoes in that book. And I wrote it with love and respect for everyone and their individual journey. So I just want everyone to have access.
Make sure you check out Lisa's website, LisaLatimer.com, for links to the book and also how to find her on all of the social media networks. Thank you so much, Lisa, for talking to me about how to become more self-aware, and using that, we can all find those little places in our lives where we can have our personal metamorphoses along the way. I still don't know the plural of that word. The Metamorphosis Podcast is produced by Nora Brucker in Germany and me, Erin Howe, in the United States. Thank you to all of our supporters, and of course, a huge thank you to our guests who are telling us their stories from around the globe about change and life-changing moments. For more information about each episode, check out officialmetamorphosispodcast.com and follow us on Instagram at Official Metamorphosis Podcast for an exclusive look behind the scenes and our guests. We are happy for you to leave your thoughts on each episode, and we are very much looking forward to hearing from you. This is the Metamorphosis Podcast with Nora and Erin.